Latin America and the Caribbean is the most violent region in the world, outside of conflict zones, making it a dangerous place to be a child. Children face violence at home, in school, and on the street. It takes different forms, including corporal punishment, sexual violence, and even homicide. A new statistical profile from UNICEF on violence against children in the region shows some alarming trends. Today, we are joined by Claudia Capa, UNICEF Senior Advisor for Statistics and Monitoring, and Kendra Gregson, UNICEF's Regional Advisors on Child Protection in Latin America and the Caribbean, who both work on the report to talk about what we found and how we can address violence against children in this region. Claudia, let us start with the data. Looking at regional trends, what does the data tell us about violence against children in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Unfortunately, the available data show that across Latin America and the Caribbean, violence is part of children's everyday life. I want to share 3 facts to illustrate what I'm saying. Here is the first fact. Violence happens everywhere in the region, including at home. Nearly 2 in 3 children between the ages of 1 and 14 in Latin America and the Caribbean experience violent discipline at home by their caregivers. As children grow, additional forms of violence become prevalent. Across countries in the region, level of sexual violence in childhood among young women vary significantly, but as many as 25% of young women in certain countries report having experienced at least once an episode of sexual violence when they were children. And unfortunately, violence becomes lethal in the region. Around 1 in 10 deaths among children and adolescents in Latin America and the Caribbean are the results of homicide. Actually, homicide is the leading cause of death among adolescents aged 10 to 19. And this confirms that unfortunately, violence starts in the home when children are very young and continue in the community as children grow.
Claudia, please, can you tell us what is most surprising for you in the report?
The most surprising fact is violence starts exactly where children are supposed to receive care and protection. It starts in the home, at the hand of the caregivers who have the responsibility to protect children from all forms of violence. As I mentioned earlier, almost 2 in 3 children aged 1 to 14 experience violent discipline on a regular basis. To be more specific, about half of children experience shouting, yelling, or screaming as a form of disciplines on a regular basis, and approximately 1 in 4 are subjected to spanking. Also, there are only 11 countries in the region that have adopted legislation that fully prohibits the use of corporal punishment against children at home and in school.
So when children face violence everywhere, every day, it becomes normal and it can seem impossible to stop. Kendra, looking at the evidence, how can we prevent something as pervasive as violence against children in Latin America and the Caribbean?
We need to begin with prevention. We need to stop violence happening in the first place. And as Claudia mentioned, violence is beginning very, very young. And so we also need to begin young. So we think about parenting programs. It's hard to be a parent. Parenting programs help parents understand a child's development, teaches parents how to care for themselves, and most importantly, introduces positive discipline practices. A child learns and copies their parent, it copies their role model. And so if a parent uses violence of any form, then it's likely that the child will also use violence. And so parenting programs interrupt that cycle. The environment is also important. Income transfers in areas of gang violence have been found to reduce the violence. Life skills training of young adolescents is also found to provide an alternative to joining a gang. Ending violence needs everyone. We need the schools to be safe from bullying, from corporal punishment, and from sexual violence. We need the health sector to be on board to recognize violence. and to be part of the solutions.
So while we know violence is a complex issue with many drivers, we also know that some promising solutions exist. So Kendra, how can governments here in Latin America and the Caribbean can help keep children safe from harm?
In the first instance, we need to adopt laws to fully prohibit corporal punishment in all settings. We need to invest in programs to prevent violence, such as the positive parenting programs that I just mentioned, that provide caregivers with the necessary support and resources. We need to recognize that violence is not normal. We need to implement social and behavior change interventions to address this normalization of violence against children. We need to strengthen the capacity of the social service workforce to prevent, to recognize, and to respond to violence against children. And that social service workforce isn't only in the child protection sector, it's also in the health sector, it's also in the education sector. And we need to improve data collection on violence against children using standard measures, and to particularly fill data gaps on different issues, such as on sexual violence during childhood.
Thank you, Claudia and Kendra, and many thanks to all of you for joining us today. If you are interested in learning more about violence against children in Latin America and the Caribbean, please check out the full statistical profile and other publications in our website. Thanks a lot.